They never meant for anyone outside the Gould estate to read this line. Buried deep inside a stack of late 19th century paperwork, one inventory survived when others were quietly lost, and on it, a single sentence about a jewel that should never have existed in that house at all. New York in the Gilded Age was a city of polished surfaces and unfinished fires. On Fifth Avenue, the Gould mansion rose like a declaration carved in stone. Railroad money turned into marble staircases, European paneling and ceilings painted to imitate a nobility America never officially had. Inside, servants learned to move without sound, relatives learned to smile without blinking, and clerks learned that some numbers were written for the record, and some were only ever spoken in locked rooms. It's in that atmosphere of unions striking in the streets, trust-busting whispers in Washington, and fortunes balanced on telegraph wires, that one insurance inventory quietly cataloged paintings, silver, railroad bonds, and something that did not fit. A European diamond of unusual size, no country of origin, no jeweler's name, no purchase agreement attached. The clerk who wrote that line knew enough to give it a place on the page, but the paper around it is unnaturally empty. When you cross-reference earlier ledgers, the jewel is nowhere. No prior mention in shipping manifests, no earlier appraisal, no polite note from a Parisian dealer asking for payment. It appears inside the Gould. Possessions the way a rumor appears in a ballroom. Suddenly, as if it had always been there, and yet with no one quite willing to say how it arrived. The more you follow that line, the less you find. A household maid dismissed without reference the same year the inventory was drawn. A junior accountant who requested a transfer and left no forwarding address. Gaps in correspondence where pages have been cut out, not misfiled. An insurance adjustment made months later in darker ink that quietly downgrades the value of certain unset stones without naming them. And outside the mansion, in the society columns that lived off scandal, a strange pattern of half-sentences, a veiled reference to a continental indiscretion, a hint at a visitor from Europe who did not stay where he was expected, allusions to a payment that was never supposed to look like a payment at all. By the time later archivists try to reconstruct the story, they find letters burned, internal memoranda, routinely destroyed, and a sealed agreement between the estate and an unnamed foreign party. The jewel remains on that one list, standing alone. It is not just an asset, it is a question. Why did it have to be written down at all? Who insisted it be insured, when so many other things were allowed to disappear into private safes and private sins? And why, in the decades that followed, did every attempt to trace its provenance end with missing files, closed doors, or families who refused to talk? Have you ever heard a story like this hidden inside a Gilded Age mansion, where one object on a quiet shelf holds more danger than a room full of rail bonds and stock certificates? If this case reminds you of another sealed room, another forgotten heir, another piece of history that never quite made it into the textbooks, share it below. This channel exists to reveal what the elite have tried to erase, so before this story slips through your fingers the way their documents did through the flames, hit like, leave your mark in the comments, and subscribe so you don't lose sight of what they worked so hard to bury. Because to understand why a single diamond became too dangerous to remain inside the Gould mansion, we have to start in the driest place imaginable. One late 19th century insurance inventory, and one quiet line that should never have been there. So if you don't stop at that quiet line on the Gould inventory, if you let your eyes drift past the sum of the coverage and into the margin notes, the trail doesn't lead deeper into Fifth Avenue first. It jumps back across the Atlantic, to a decade when Europe was still redrawing its borders, and old families were discovering that titles did not guarantee solvency. In the early 1870s, amid the static of post-war debt and shifting alliances, a series of discreet notices begins to appear in European newspapers, never on the front page, always tucked between market reports and court circulars. They speak, in careful language, of a notable stone attached to a contested estate, of a misunderstanding between heirs, of a sale postponed due to unexpected developments. No photographs, of course, just a phrase here, a whisper there. But when you line them up, they orbit the same object. A diamond large enough to settle certain obligations, or shatter what remained of a family's dignity. The official story, as the lawyers later framed it, was simple. An ailing nobleman, estates entangled in mortgages, wished to liquidate a portion of his jewelry to protect the core of his holdings. The unofficial story circulates in salons and smoking rooms instead. A younger mistress appears in some versions, an illegitimate child in others, a brother who drank, a sister who refused a politically advantageous marriage. The diamond, according to these private versions, had been pledged and repledged so many times that no one could say with confidence who truly owned it by the time the old man died. The night before the first valuation, there is a sudden illness. The next morning, the newspapers report a peaceful passing. The doctors sign what they are told to sign. And in the noise of mourning, someone slips into the strong room with a set of keys they were never supposed to have. Diplomatic notes from the same period, preserved under dry language and stamped crests, add another layer. An embassy complains about unfounded insinuations against one of its nationals. A foreign minister writes, off the record, of a jewel that might complicate ongoing negotiations if certain details were to become public. A banker in London, writing to a counterpart in Paris, avoids the word theft, but admits that one stone in particular has attracted the sort of attention that invites both ruin and opportunity. These are not the phrases used for a simple brooch or an ordinary inheritance dispute. They suggest a piece of property capable of tilting more than a balance sheet, capable of exposing an affair, undermining a claim, or proving that a marriage alliance was never what it appeared to be. The brokers who handle such complications do not advertise. You find them, in the archives, only when a name surfaces twice in different countries under different titles. One of them, whose handwriting slants in a practiced anonymity, leaves a small bundle of correspondence behind. Our American friends, he writes, are increasingly prepared to absorb certain items that European houses no longer wish to see associated with their names. There is a hint of almost amused resignation in another line. They live in a gilded age over there, eager for golden age secrets, and less troubled by the precise path of an object than by its immediate brilliance in the ballroom. He never names the stone outright. He never has to. By the time his letters shift from old world estates to new world railroads, you can see the arc. Somewhere between a last bitter lawsuit in Vienna and a quiet settlement in Brussels, the diamond vanishes from the European record. Not sold at auction, not seized for taxes, not listed among confiscated assets after a regime change. It simply stops being described. In its place, you start noticing other things. A widow who moves into smaller rooms than she has any need to occupy. A son who refuses to wear the family crest in public. A house where the shutters are closed for months, then rented to strangers. Silent witnesses, all of them. The paper trail thins because the human trail has already shattered. And yet, within a few years, across an ocean, an oddly similar stone materializes in private appraisals conducted in New York, in the orbit of the American railroad aristocracy, right as the Gould name is becoming synonymous with leverage, expansion, and the ruthless logic of modern wealth. In this world, where hidden heirs can be erased with a pen stroke and forbidden rooms can be locked for generations, a jewel with no clean story is both an asset and a liability. The Goulds, like their peers, knew how to manage both. They understood that the press could be fed a certain narrative, a charity ball here, a generous endowment there, while more delicate matters were resolved behind closed doors. When a stone like this enters their orbit, you do not see a public announcement. You see instead small adjustments, a sudden payment on a lingering European obligation, a visit from an attorney known for negotiating settlements that never reach the courts, a guest list that quietly changes, with one particular foreign surname disappearing after a single season. The newspapers, starved for scandal, pick up only the edges. An unfortunate misunderstanding. A matter never intended for public attention. A rumor unworthy of comment. The systems that keep such stories contained are mundane on the surface. Archive rooms in banks where ledgers can be rebound with one page removed. Legal offices where clerks are instructed to retype an agreement and omit the unnecessary reference. Family councils where the elders explain without raising their voices why certain photographs will not be framed, why certain letters must be burned after reading. In one archive, a register of insurance appraisals from the 1880s has clearly been altered. A strip of paper pasted over a line, the ink just a shade darker, the handwriting only slightly more careful. Under strong light, you can make out an earlier word, scratched away but not quite gone. It is not the name of the diamond. It is the name of a person. The connection between them is the kind of dark legacy families spend decades trying to disconnect. What emerges when you place these fragments side by side is not a clean narrative but a pattern of fractures. Wherever the jewel appears, alliances shift. Engagements are broken with no explanation given. Business partners lessen their visits. A cousin is encouraged to travel for his health and does not return to the city for years. The Gould mansion, with its towering ceilings and polished floors, becomes one more stage where these movements play out in silence. Servants learn which corridor not to use at certain hours. A guest is moved from one bedroom to another with a vague excuse about a draft from the windows, though the real reason sits in a locked case 2 doors down. The stone is never mentioned by name, yet conversations lower when its cabinet is within sight. No one says they are afraid of it. They don't need to. From the vantage point of today, as you sit with these scattered documents and partial memories, it is easy to underestimate how much was at stake. To admit that the diamond had once been used to secure a secret, or to silence a claim, would be to admit that some fortunes rested not just on railroads and steel, but on buried compromises that could still bleed. Families of that era could tolerate rumors, but not proof, so they learned to live with erased records and carefully curated absences. They allowed certain doors in their mansions to remain closed, not because of ghosts, but because of contracts. They let certain names fade from genealogies, leaving behind only a ripple, a portrait removed from a hallway, a mention scratched out in a ledger, a chair that was once always occupied and then never used again. And if you follow the trail far enough, you reach a document that never appears in public inventories at all. A private floor plan of the Gould mansion, prepared for internal renovations. On it, every room is labeled, every corridor marked, except for one space, a narrow rectangle pressed between a dressing room and an outer wall. There is no annotation, no indication of purpose. On later versions of the plan, that space disappears entirely, as if the wall had never hidden anything more than stone and plaster. Yet an older caretaker's note, left on a separate scrap of paper, refers to the small room near the north gallery, to be kept locked at all times. When you hold the plan and the note together, the missing room hovers over the page like a smudge. It does not show the diamond. It only confirms that something, and perhaps someone, was once kept where no visitor was meant to look, and that the silence surrounding that empty space has outlived every voice that could explain why. If you listen closely to the paper, there's a moment where the diamond stops behaving like jewelry and starts behaving like a signature you can move without ink. After it crosses into the world of Fifth Avenue, you don't see it fluttering at the throat of a Gould hostess in the society pages. You don't see it glittering in studio portraits. What you see instead are small, dense paragraphs in internal correspondence where the tone shifts from polite to careful. A memorandum from a private banker, for instance, drafted on heavy cream paper, notes that one exceptional item, not listed in the public schedule, may suffice as temporary assurance for the extended line of credit, provided its existence remains understood only among the parties present. No description of the item, just that phrase, exceptional. In the margin, in a different hand, there is a single letter, D, that someone later tries to blur with a thumb smudge. When railroad expansion falters or an antitrust case starts to murmur through Washington, the stone reappears, not in the light, but as a quiet presence in negotiations. A lawyer's notes from a late-night meeting mention that certain collateral has been verbally indicated but will not be named in the draft agreement. In the corner of the page, there's a quick sketch of a rectangle with a diagonal line through it, like a shorthand symbol for something too sensitive to spell out. Men in tailored coats lean over polished tables, their voices dropping as they reach that part of the conversation. One of them taps a signet ring against a glass. Once, a small metallic click that tells everyone this is the point where the discussion leaves the realm of ordinary contracts. No one says diamond. They refer to the item, the assurance, our portable safeguard. In a typical Gilded Age household, a jewel of that magnitude would have been shown off at least once to announce arrival into the upper stratosphere. Think of how often the press breathlessly described tiaras at balls, how meticulously photographers in the early Golden Age studios arranged society women to catch the light on their necklaces. Yet with this stone, the trail in that direction is almost blank. One faint reference, in a private note from a dressmaker who worked for more than one Fifth Avenue family, mentions a commission abandoned when the lady chose not to appear in the piece that had been described to me. The sketch pinned behind the note shows a neckline designed to bear significant weight, and then a darker line scratched through it, as if the idea had been canceled with more force than necessary. Instead, the diamond's presence is felt in places where no camera was ever invited. A banker arrives at the mansion by a side entrance, long after the servants' dinner, escorted not by a footman, but by a trusted manager from the Gould offices. Upstairs, in a sitting room whose curtains are drawn against the street lamps, a small velvet case is placed on a low table between decanters of whiskey. No one rushes to open it. They talk first, about yields, about pending legislation, about a rival's sudden interest in a key section of track. Only when the conversation tightens does one of the Gould men lift the lid, just enough for the banker to glance inside. There's a pause, a barely audible exhale, and afterward the terms of the loan grow more flexible. The case closes again. The object returns to its status as rumor. That's the pattern you see across the surviving documents. The jewel as leverage, not ornament. In one private appraisal, never intended for insurance files, a discreet jeweler notes that the stone's market value is considerable, but its practical value to the present owners appears to lie more in its capacity to secure intangible arrangements. He underlines intangible arrangements once. There is a stain on the page along that line, not quite ink, not quite water, something that spread when a glass was set down too hard. You can almost picture the scene, a Gould patriarch standing over the jeweler's shoulder, not asking how the stone might look in a new setting, but how quickly it could be realized, how easily it could be placed in a vault overseas if circumstances changed. Among the Golden Age secrets of that era, this kind of arrangement was not unheard of. Wealth at that level depended on more than ledgers and stock certificates. There were hidden heirs who might one day appear with claims, forbidden rooms where papers were kept that never saw a court, silent witnesses who knew which safe deposit boxes contained not just bonds, but personal compromises in gemstone form. The Goulds understood the logic of inheritance and succession intimately. Which assets could be entailed, which could be quietly moved, which could be pledged in a way that left no trace in the public registers. In the world beyond the golden halls, a jewel meant luxury. Inside those halls, in the darker corners, it could mean the difference between a dynasty bending and a dynasty breaking. You see the cost of that strategy in the edits. A series of letters between family attorneys decades later show a growing unease. One partner, in a moment of rare frankness, writes, "The continued reliance on certain portable securities as unrecorded leverage exposes us, in retrospect, to interpretations that would be unkind if the full context were ever reconstructed." The phrase portable securities is doing a lot of work there. Somewhere behind it is the diamond, still being moved across tables, still whispered about in rooms that ordinary visitors would have taken for simple parlors. The weight of the secret isn't measured only in carats, but in the way hands tremble slightly when the case is passed from one guardian to another, in the way doors are checked twice after a meeting ends. The longer this continues, the more the stone itself becomes indistinguishable from the threats it represents. It stands in, silently, for the mistress who was paid to remain abroad, for the business partner who accepted a quiet buyout instead of a public trial, for the foreign government that agreed to let a certain investigation die in committee, a dark legacy encased in velvet. To remove it from circulation would be to admit that these arrangements ever existed. To keep it in play is to accept that every time it is brought out, there is another opportunity for the story behind it to leak. It is controlled risk, but risk nonetheless. And over time, the control begins to look thinner than the paper on which those private memoranda were typed. And then there are the small human traces, the ones that never imagined an audience. A housemaid's recollection, recorded much later, describes hearing voices from the gentleman's sitting room, very low, like they were in church, and then a sudden silence when a drawer was opened. A footman is reprimanded for entering a study without knocking. The entry in his personnel file notes that he witnessed matters not intended for his observation, and was thereafter assigned to a different floor. These are your silent witnesses, people whose stories were never meant to overlap with the stone, and yet their trajectories inside the house change in ways that align suspiciously with the times the jewel is most needed. Their names, when you find them in employment records, often have a small mark beside them, a dot, a faint dash. By the time later archivists and curious historians begin to backtrace these patterns, many of the primary actors are gone. What remains are erased records, altered ledgers, gaps in the narrative where entire folders ought to be. A bound volume of correspondence in one law firm's collection has a torn edge where a letter was clearly removed. The index still lists letter regarding auxiliary collateral, 1893, but the page number leads only to blankness. At a bank, a register of safe deposit contents from the early 1900s shows an entry for a box associated with a Gould holding company. Then, a few years later, a neat line drawn through the description column, leaving only the box number and the word closed. No note of where the contents went, no transfer record, just a horizontal stroke erasing the only hint that something unusual was once stored there. And in one packet of surviving papers from the mansion itself, carefully cataloged long after the family moved on, there is a photograph that should not exist and yet somehow does. It shows a small gathering in one of the less public rooms, a narrow parlor with bookcases and a marble mantel. On the table, barely visible at first glance, sits a familiar velvet case. The faces around it are blurred, not by time, but by deliberate handling. Someone has pressed a thumb over each one, rubbing until the emulsion clouded. Only hands remain clear. A gloved hand resting near the case, a bare hand hovering above it, a third hand holding a fountain pen poised over a sheet of paper. The official inventories, the public tours, the polished histories of the Gilded Age never mention a meeting like this. Yet here it is, an object that contradicts the version everyone agreed to tell, an image where the jewel's presence is undeniable and the people responsible for it have been rubbed into anonymity, leaving behind a quiet, grainy rectangle where the silence seems to deepen every time you look. There comes a point in every dark legacy where the secret stops behaving. For the Goulds, the documents suggest that moment arrived on a winter evening when the house was lit almost to the rafters, and nothing, at least on paper, was supposed to go wrong. The invitations called it a reception in honor of visiting industrialists and distinguished foreign representatives. The society columns, in the days leading up to it, promised a convergence of the Gilded Age's most aggressive fortunes under one roof. Rival magnates whose rail lines scraped against each other on the map. Political intermediaries whose smiles reached further than their official powers. And guests from abroad who could turn a handshake into a treaty or a threat. Inside, Gould Manor, footmen polished banisters that were already shining. Extra lamps were brought into the long gallery, and a small army of servants rehearsed the choreography of coats, cigars, and champagne refills. On the surface, it was just another night when wealth admired itself in mirrors. The surviving clippings tell the story in fragments. A morning paper, written before anyone knew it should be cautious, gushes over the brilliant assembly expected at the Gould residence, listing names that read now like a roll call of the era. Railroad competitors, steel men, a senator with presidential ambitions, an envoy rumored to be more important than his title suggested. One line, almost throwaway, notes that certain pieces from the family collection may be shown to select guests. No detail, just the promise of sparkle. A different paper, printed 2 days later, sounds much different. It mentions an unfortunate disturbance near the end of the evening, insists that no lasting harm was done, and concludes with the oddly defensive statement that all reports of an extravagant jewel being involved have been exaggerated by those not present. That's the first time the stone edges into public ink. Even then, it's framed as something to deny. Inside the house, according to a fragment of a private diary, the atmosphere thickened in ways that don't register on guest lists. The writer, someone close enough to notice the details servants hide, but not powerful enough to control the narrative, records small things. A foreign guest who arrives late and stands for a moment just inside the doorway, scanning the room as if counting enemies. A Gould family member adjusting a cufflink so often that it's no longer a nervous tick, but a metronome. A cluster of men near the library door whose laughter comes out in short, sharp bursts, as if they are rehearsing an argument in miniature. In the long gallery, music drifts above the hum of conversation, but every time a certain name is mentioned, the violinist's bow hesitates for a fraction of a beat. The diary doesn't explain why. It only notes that the air near the north staircase felt heavier than the rest of the house, as if the walls were listening. At some point in the evening, the jewel leaves its usual world of cases and side rooms and steps, quite literally, into the light. The accounts do not agree on who insisted. One version hints that a foreign guest, already aware of whispers from Europe, requested to see the famous piece as a matter of curiosity. Another suggests that an American rival, eager to test just how far the Goulds were willing to leverage their assets, asked a question that could not be answered politely without reference to the stone. What is consistent is this. A velvet case appears in the hands of a trusted family representative, and instead of being opened privately over ledger paper, it is carried up toward the main floor, toward the warm blaze of the reception rooms, past a staircase where servants usually move, not treasures. From there, the scene sharpens. A small group gathers near the base of the grand staircase, just enough distance from the ballroom to feel discreet, but close enough that the spill of light makes secrecy difficult. The case rests on a polished side table. For a moment, it remains closed, an unremarkable rectangle surrounded by cut glass and silver. Then someone, different sources name different hands, flicks the clasp. The lid lifts. Whatever has been contained all these years catches a line of gaslight and throws it back into the room. According to the diary, a nearby conversation falters mid-sentence. A woman's fan pauses halfway through its arc. A senator's gaze, previously fixed on his reflection in a gilded mirror, slides inexorably toward the stone. No one speaks its history aloud, but suddenly, too many people are looking at the same point on the table. The argument, when it comes, starts in a tone the servants have heard. Before soft, measured, the way men in power disagree when they assume the walls cannot harm them. A guest from abroad leans in, one hand resting on the edge of the table, the other tightening around his glass until the cut crystal squeaks. A Gould representative, older, shoulders drawn back as if bracing against a wind no one else feels, answers with something brief enough not to carry. A third figure, one of the rival magnates, steps closer than politeness requires, his shadow falling directly across the jewel. The diary mentions a phrase spoken in a language most of the room did not understand, but whose tone needed no translation. The music in the gallery stumbles, recovers, then grows louder, as if someone has signaled the musicians to drown out whatever is happening near the stairs. What happens next is preserved less in words than in the shape of later records. A brief coroner's note, filed without fanfare, reports that a man suffered a sudden collapse upon a staircase, presumably due to existing conditions, and that no evidence of external violence was observed. The body is described in neutral terms: male, well-dressed, of a certain age. The note does not mention that his hand, when he fell, knocked into a small table and sent a velvet case skidding dangerously close to the edge. It does not record that a footman, rushing forward out of reflex, froze when he saw what was about to hit the marble, and that an outstretched gloved hand intercepted the case, inches before it shattered open in front of half the room. Those details survive only in the diary, where the writer describes the sound of a collective breath being swallowed, louder in its way than the thud of a body against stone. From the newspaper's perspective, the evening yields only an unsettling incident. One discreet column hints at a guest whose health betrayed him at an inopportune moment, and mentions, almost with annoyance, that some have seen fit to attach this to a sensational story about a certain jewel, which we will not perpetuate. The omission is as telling as any confession. Cross-checking the guest lists printed before the event with the names mentioned afterward, you find gaps. One foreign dignitary, heavily advertised as attending, disappears from the coverage as if he never set foot in the house. A lesser-known industrialist, whose presence was not considered newsworthy before, suddenly appears in later society notes traveling abroad for an indefinite period. In between those vanishing acts lies a staircase, a case, and a moment when too many eyes saw too much. Inside Gould Manor, the aftermath rearranges the map of the house in ways no floor plan captures. Servants tasked with cleaning the stairs the next morning notice faint scuffs on the banister at shoulder height, as though several hands grasped it in quick succession. A faint stain on the runner is scrubbed so insistently that the pattern blurs. A housemaid, passing the side table where the case had rested, finds a small indentation in the polished wood, the kind left by a heavy object sliding suddenly under pressure. No one explains. Instructions are simple and tight. This corridor is to be kept clear during future entertainments. This table is to be moved to a less visible corner. The door at the top of the staircase will henceforth remain closed when guests are present. Forbidden rooms are often created this way, not by architects, but by panic. The jewel, once returned to the shadows, becomes more dangerous than ever precisely because it has been glimpsed in the open. Rumors spread along lines the Goulds cannot fully control. Club conversations pick up the story in half-joking tones. Did you hear that even their diamonds collapse under pressure? A foreign paper carries an obscure reference to a certain American house that toys with old European fire, then retreats into safer topics. Within the family's own correspondence, the language shifts. Where earlier memoranda treated the stone as a tool, later ones circle it like a wound. One attorney writes that continued retention of the item in question invites interpretations we may no longer be able to redirect. Another suggests that disposition, if considered, must avoid all channels accessible to future scrutiny. It is the voice of a world that has lived off erased records, suddenly forced to acknowledge that not everything can be erased. For the channel we inhabit, this space where Golden Age secrets are reconstructed from what refuses to burn, the night at Gould Manor reads like the hinge in a story, the moment when a hidden heir steps into a doorway they were never meant to cross, or when a forbidden room finally opens onto witnesses who can still speak. Here it is an object that oversteps. A jewel designed to be wielded in the dark becomes, for a few bright, dangerous minutes, the brightest thing in the room. The price of protecting a legacy shifts from money and influence to a more desperate calculus. How many documents must be destroyed? How many testimonies must be softened or silenced to convince the world that nothing unusual happened on that staircase? Years later, when archivists and descendants try to piece together what occurred, they find that the night has been smoothed in official narratives to a simple health incident and a regrettable interruption. Yet in a box of uncatalogued materials, one researcher comes across a folded sheet. An original guest list for the reception, written in ink that has browned with age. Names march neatly down the page, each accompanied by a tiny mark indicating acceptance. Near the middle of the list, just where the eye begins to grow tired, one entry stands out. Not for the name itself, but for what has been done to it. A heavy line, scored again and again with the same impatient stroke, obliterates both letters and title. No replacement name has been written beside it. No note explains the omission. There is only that dark bar across the paper, a single angry correction that seems to hum with the memory of a night when everything became too visible, and one presence, on paper at least, had to be erased to make the silence hold. In a Gilded Age house, the real panic never shows on the night itself. It seeps into the weeks after, into the ink that dries a little faster, into the letters that grow shorter just when you most want them to explain. After that too visible evening at Gould Manor, the paper trail doesn't explode, it contracts. Insurance policies that had rested untouched for years are suddenly updated, their language tightened in a way that looks routine until you compare before and after. Where one schedule once listed certain exceptional items appraised separately, the revised version speaks only of miscellaneous stones of secondary importance. The total value barely changes, the description does. What mattered most is now hidden in the vaguest possible phrase. Valuations are rewritten in the same careful tone. A jeweler who previously described one remarkable diamond of unusual size in a private note now produces a cleaner, second appraisal for the files. No mention of singular pieces, just a bland paragraph about assorted gems. The handwriting is his, but his pen seems to hesitate in places, as if correcting what he himself had once recorded. In the margin of the earlier document, a faint pencil mark, perhaps a question, perhaps a warning, has been rubbed almost to nothing. That's how Golden Age secrets survive, not with dramatic bonfires in the courtyard, but with quiet erasures on weekday afternoons in back offices. Inside the Gould machinery, ledgers themselves begin to move. One contract, initially naming a specific broker as intermediary for high-value collateral, appears in a later copy with that name neatly lifted out. The sentence closes over the gap as if no person ever stood there at all. In the archives, you can sometimes find both versions pressed together, the older one yellowed, the newer a little crisper. Hold them up to the light and you can see the ghost of the removed name through the page, like a hidden heir standing just behind a respectable family portrait. A lawyer's memorandum from this period speaks of mitigating exposure and de-emphasizing certain assets in any future disclosures. Phrases that sound dry until you remember there is a stone behind them that has already brought a man down a staircase in front of half a room. The house reacts too in ways that never make the newspapers. Staff payroll records show abrupt changes. A footman released due to redundancy the week after the reception. A maid transferred to a relative's estate upstate. A long-serving butler suddenly retired with a generous reference. These are your silent witnesses, removed not because they told the story, but because they might have. In a world where forbidden rooms exist not only in stone, but in memory, editing the cast can be as important as editing the documents. Later, when descendants look back, all they see is a line in a ledger where a name stops appearing. The reasons are gone, leaving only a gap that hums with possibility. Beyond the manor, the Goulds lean on the mechanisms of influence they have always used to shape the narrative. Friendly editors are reminded discreetly how much advertising money the family's ventures funnel into their pages. A columnist who had been tempted to dwell on an extravagant jewel and an unfortunate collapse receives, instead of open threats, an invitation to a private dinner and a reminder of which stories are considered unhelpful to national confidence. The result is not an outright lie, but a soft fog. Vague notices about inaccurate reports, reassurances that no foreign relations were strained, and a studied reluctance to revisit the subject. Publicly, the incident becomes an awkward anecdote. Privately, it remains a dark legacy no one wants to name. In legal files, the language grows almost aggressively bland. One attorney recommends reclassifying certain holdings to reduce their prominence in estate planning discussions. Another suggests that, in future, any reference to specific high-value items be confined to verbal communication among trusted parties. You can feel the fear of scandal pressing against the paper. Not the kind of scandal that ruins a season's social calendar, but the deeper, structural kind, the sort that invites regulators to pry open safes, the sort that might reveal how often leverage in this era traveled not on trains but in velvet cases. For families built on layered compromises, the price of protecting a legacy is now measured in how much reality they are willing to amputate from their own records. When you sit with these ledgers and letters today, long after the people who wrote them have gone quiet, the question becomes uncomfortably personal. Faced with a trail this carefully edited, would you speak openly about what you infer, or would you stay silent, knowing how a family like this once reacted to anyone who saw too much? Archivists whisper to each other about patterns that can't be proven but can't be ignored. A note scribbled in the back of one file, decades later, simply says, "There is something missing here," underlined twice, and then whoever wrote it thought better of elaborating. Even in the world of records, some witnesses choose to look away. And yet, now and then, the damage control fails to fully erase the outline of what happened. In a forgotten envelope at the bottom of a box marked only miscellaneous domestic, a researcher finds a small sepia photograph of the grand staircase taken years after the scandal. The banister gleams, the carpet runner is new, and the angle is slightly off-center, as if whoever held the camera wanted to capture the space without drawing attention to why. On the wall above the landing hangs a large portrait in an ornate frame. Every detail of the background is crisp, the folds of a curtain, the shine on a chair leg. But where the subject's face should be, the emulsion has been deliberately scraped away, leaving a pale, featureless oval staring down at the steps. The official histories never mention a portrait removed or altered there, but the empty face, suspended above the staircase where everything once became too visible, seems to say more in its silence than any surviving name ever could. For a family like the Goulds, getting rid of a problem never meant tossing it into the river. It meant changing the way the world was allowed to name it. By the time the jewel leaves Gould Manor, it does so not in a blaze of drama, but in the quiet vocabulary of shipping manifests and bank ledgers, the kind of paper most people never read closely enough to notice where the danger is hiding. In one set of records, weeks after the reception, a small insured parcel appears on a cargo list. Weight modest, declared contents, personal effects. Destination a private vault associated with a downtown institution that specialized in holding what the Gilded Age preferred not to discuss. No mention of diamonds, no hint of European scandal, just a line between crates of textiles and boxes of machine parts, as if this were nothing more than a forgotten trunk. Track the trail forward and that same parcel seems to dissolve and reform under another name. In a bank's internal inventory, you find an entry added in a different ink, squeezed between two older lines. Unnumbered item of high value. No description, no cut, no carat weight. It sits there like a cleared throat in the middle of a paragraph. A separate list from another institution years later references the transfer of certain valuables from client accounts wishing reduced visibility. You can guess which dark legacy is being moved without ever seeing the word stone. The jewel hasn't disappeared. It has been turned into a rumor inside a vault. Behind those neutral phrases, the correspondence grows more agitated. A banker writes to a Gould attorney recommending a sale through channels sufficiently remote from current family interests. The reply, brisk and cool, warns that any sale risks reviving questions in quarters we have worked diligently to quiet. Another letter, from a jeweler brought in for a confidential consultation, suggests recutting. A reworked piece would be less recognizable to those familiar with earlier descriptions. The idea hangs there, chilling in its practicality. To alter the stone would be to mutilate the last tangible link to the chain of hidden heirs, forbidden rooms and silent witnesses that have followed it across the ocean. To leave it intact is to keep a loaded document in 3 dimensions. The debate never resolves on paper. At some point, the letters stop mentioning outcomes and speak only of final disposition, as if the less said, the safer everyone is. Back at Gould Manor, the erasure is architectural as much as financial. Early floor plans and household inventories mark a particular cabinet in a side room off the north gallery, described simply as locked case, family valuables. Servants knew better than to dust it without permission. Later plans, drawn up for renovations in the new century, show the same wall transformed into uninterrupted shelving. The notation for the case is gone. In its place, bookcase built in. A small scribble in the margin, probably the architect's, notes that existing recess to be filled flush. On paper, the jewel never had a designated place in the house at all. The room becomes just another corner where guests might browse leather-bound volumes, unaware that their fingers trace the edge of what was once a void reserved for something too dangerous to leave in the open. This is how Golden Age secrets are supposed to end. Not with confession, but with a series of practical adjustments. A vault move. Here, a revised blueprint there, a change in how a line is phrased in a ledger. By the time later generations walk those halls, the only evidence that anything was removed lies in slight oddities, the way one section of shelving sounds more hollow than the rest when you tap it, the way older staff avoid telling stories about that part of the gallery. Archivists sifting through erased records and half-scorched correspondence are left to infer, to lean over boxes under dim reading room lamps and ask themselves how much of their reconstruction they dare to say out loud. After all, even long-dead power can make people wary. The fear of destroying reputations lingers, even when the reputations in question are already marble and dust. And yet, something always slips the net. In a municipal archive far from Fifth Avenue, among rolled-up blueprints deposited as a formality for zoning, a researcher unfastens 2 plans of Gould Manor, drawn decades apart. The older one clearly marks a narrow service corridor and a small windowless niche off the north gallery wall, the space where the locked case once stood. The later plan, the official version cited in preservation guides and coffee table histories, shows nothing but a straight, continuous wall lined with dignified shelving. As the paper relaxes under the weight of the researcher's hands, a faint shadow where the niche used to be seems to bleed through the newer ink. In the overlap between those 2 versions, a thin, penciled rectangle survives, a door outline that does not exist in the final design, a doorway that should lead nowhere at all, and its quiet, impossible presence on that pristine wall hangs there like a question no one in the family ever intended to leave behind. Once the jewel is gone from the house and buried, at least on paper, in a vault that refuses to name it, the Gould story begins its next phase. Not destruction, but revision. If you lay their portraits out in chronological order, you can almost watch the decision harden. Early in the Gilded Age, the family faces the camera like conquerors, layered in light. Diamond sprays at throats, heavy necklaces stacked over embroidered silk, tiaras catching every gas jet in the studio. The photographer's glass loves that kind of confidence. Then, somewhere after the night at the manor and the quiet removal of the stone, the image shifts. The poses remain dignified, the backgrounds just as elaborate, but the jewelry retreats. Collars close a little, higher. Necklaces become thin chains. A pair of hands that once would have displayed a cascade of brilliant stones now rest carefully on a plain armrest, the only sparkle a wedding band. The captions below those photographs begin to sound like sermons. Where earlier clippings praised their conspicuous display of wealth, later pieces dwell on prudence, moderation, a commendable sense of moral responsibility for their position. A family that once defined itself by acquisition now frames itself as steward, custodian, almost reluctant beneficiary of fortune. The shift isn't accidental. In drafts of speeches that never reach the podium, you see the edits. A line about Our European connections crossed out, a phrase about humble American beginnings written in its place. The jewel, product of European scandal, symbol of every golden age secret they imported with old world diamonds, no longer fits the story they want to tell their own descendants, much less the public. So the story is rewritten until the stone has nowhere to stand. Inside the house, a privately printed family history circulates among the branches, the kind of book meant to sit on polished tables and reassure younger generations of their place. Its pages are thick, its tone serene. Railroads are described in glowing terms, as instruments of national progress. Properties are listed with precise acreages and charming anecdotes about harvests, renovations, and charitable fetes held on manicured lawns. Philanthropic achievements swell to fill entire chapters. Hospitals endowed, scholarships created, libraries built in towns that had never seen marble before. But when the narrative reaches the period where the jewel should appear, those European acquisitions that first tied the Goulds to old world diamonds, the prose glides past with a single thin sentence. Certain foreign ventures were undertaken and later concluded without lasting impact on the family's core commitments. No names, no countries, no stones, just a veil drawn over the exact point where the dark legacy took shape. The legal record follows suit. In an earlier will, hidden deep in an attorney's file, specific items are named with pride. The large European diamond acquired in the 1870s, the estate jewels brought from abroad, the set of stones appraised separately for insurance purposes. Later versions replace that clarity with fog. Jewelry reappears only as personal effects, certain articles of adornment, miscellaneous items of sentimental value. The jewel's distinct characteristics, its size, its origin, its extraordinary appraisals, are gone. To a casual reader, the list suggests nothing more than brooches and family trinkets. The language has been sanded smooth until no hand can find a sharp edge to catch on. In a world where hidden heirs and forbidden rooms can topple reputations decades after the fact, vagueness becomes a kind of armor. Beyond the paperwork, the public image machine adjusts to the new script. Articles about the Goulds begin to echo the same themes, as if written from a quiet set of talking points. Their devotion to sober living, their concern for the stability of markets, their belief that great wealth carries obligations rather than indulgences. Photographers are subtly guided away from lingering on what little jewelry remains, encouraged instead to capture children in simple clothing, older family members in unadorned black. A visiting journalist who remarks on the absence of extravagant diamonds at a major reception is told, with a polite smile, that such displays no longer suit the times. The line works its way into other write-ups until it solidifies as fact. The Goulds have outgrown their glitter. The truth, that one particular glitter nearly tore a hole in their facade, remains unprinted. By the time you and I encounter this story, the people who posed for those restrained portraits are long gone, their expressions frozen in dignified calm. The testimony of those who watched the jewel move through forbidden rooms, who heard the whispers on staircases and saw the silent witnesses dismissed in the weeks after, has thinned to almost nothing. We are left with what the family chose to preserve and what they tried to erase. Altered ledgers, redrafted wills, a family chronicle that glides over the most dangerous years as if they were uneventful. The weight of the secret lives not just in what's missing, but in the effort expended to make its absence look natural. That is the real price of protecting a legacy in the Gilded Age, teaching future generations to recognize themselves in a story where the most volatile element has been carefully written out. And still, even the best crafted narrative leaves seams. In one archive, tucked between copies of the revised family history, an earlier proof survives, the version that was never supposed to leave the printer's shop. Most of its pages match the final text word for word, but near the back, in the section on European acquisitions, there is a paragraph that does not appear in the published book. It mentions, in cautious language, a notable stone whose presence proved more burdensome than its value justified. Someone has taken a dark pen and dragged it back and forth across those lines until the ink has soaked through, bleeding into the paper like a shadow. The paragraph is illegible now, reduced to a black bar under a neat heading, but if you tilt the page to the light, you can still see the faint outline of the original words beneath that heavy stroke. A name, a date, a place, straining against the surface of the story they thought they had sealed. Long after the receptions ended and the gaslights in Gould Manor were replaced by quieter bulbs, the real fear settled into places no guest would ever see. Basement vaults, storage rooms above law offices, the back shelves of archives where only dust and junior clerks ever lingered. It's there, in an acquired legal collection from a long-defunct Manhattan firm. That one draft opinion surfaces, a sheaf of onion skin pages clipped together, stamped, confidential, not for circulation, written in a tone so cold it almost clears the air around it. The subject line is dry. Potential reputational exposure arising from certain European acquisitions. No one who didn't already know would guess that the entire document is, in truth, about a single jewel the family now pretends never to have owned. The memo reads, like someone turning on all the lights in a forbidden room and taking inventory without flinching. It lists, in neutral phrases, the trail the stone has left behind, foreign lawsuits still pending in European courts, testimony and probate files where witnesses hinted at foul play without daring to state it outright, diplomatic complaints that never made it into the newspapers. The author notes that lingering rumors connecting the object to untimely deaths and contested estates remain extant in certain continental circles. That's how the Gilded Age recorded its ghosts, lingering rumors, untimely deaths, as if word choice could blunt the edge of what those phrases really meant. The opinion warns that any renewed association between the Gould name and those old-world diamonds would invite unwelcome scrutiny of past events and current holdings. In other words, one determined journalist, in an era when muckrakers were already prying open monopolies, might decide that this particular dark legacy is worth dragging back into the light. The recommendations are blunt in a way the public never sees. The first is distance. No further public mention of European acquisitions, no interviews that linger on old connections, no willingness to lend pieces to exhibitions where curious curators might match cuts and carat weights to long-buried descriptions. The second is obfuscation, reclassifying the jewel out of existence in ledgers and wills, dissolving it into miscellaneous items, ensuring that any paper connecting it to specific tragedies becomes, at best, a misfiled curiosity. And the third, stated in almost chilling plainness, is physical removal. The object in question should not remain in any location reasonably associated with the family's domestic or corporate activities. For a stone that once sat at the center of forbidden rooms and private negotiations, the advice is clear: exile or risk letting its history bleed into the present. Reading those lines now, in the quiet of an archive where the only sound is the soft crackle of old paper, it's hard not to feel the weight of what secrets cost. The memo never names the jewel, but it doesn't have to. You can hear it in the way the author worries about hidden heirs emboldened by recent press trends, about silent witnesses who may yet be persuaded to revisit prior statements, about journalistic enterprises whose interest in Golden Age secrets extends beyond mere society gossip. This is the internal lay. Fear no one was supposed to read. The recognition that the carefully constructed story of American success, the one engraved in marble and printed in family histories, could still be punctured by one object with the wrong provenance. The price of protecting a legacy, the opinion implies, may include sacrificing any claim to the most dazzling thing they ever owned. And this is where the question reaches us, across more than a century. If a document like this landed on your desk today, would you treat it as a curious artifact of a harsher time, or as a warning about how much the elite will still sacrifice to remain untouchable? The ink has faded to a soft brown. The firm that wrote it no longer exists. The men who signed off on these strategies are long past defending themselves. Yet the logic feels uncomfortably familiar. Manage the narrative. Bury the paper trail. Let the forbidden rooms stay locked and the erased records do their quiet work. The memo was never meant for archivists or channels like this. It was meant to live, briefly, in an inner circle and then vanish into a file drawer that no one outside the family's orbit would ever open. Except something went wrong in the choreography of destruction. On the final page of the draft, beneath the neatly typed conclusion and the recommendation for immediate steps to ensure that no traceable association remains between the family name and the object's prior history, there is a space for partner approval. One name was typed. There in full, first, middle initial, and last, followed by a thin line for his signature. At some point, perhaps after second thoughts or a late-night conversation, no transcript records, someone took a pen and dragged it hard across that name again and again until the paper buckled, reducing the letters to a dense black scar. No replacement name was added. No notation explains the change. The opinion survived, but the person who owned it on the record has been scratched out, leaving only that brutal, ink-dark line where an identity used to be, humming like a warning in the silence of the archive. If you only looked at the headlines, you'd think the Gould story in these years turned into a simple tale of redemption. Almost as soon as the jewel vanishes from household inventories and reappears as an unnumbered item of high value in anonymous vaults, another pattern begins to glow on the surface. Philanthropy. Hospitals receive unexpected endowments. Museums announce new wings made possible by the generosity of a leading family of the railroad age. Orchestras, universities, cultural institutions from Boston to Chicago suddenly find their ledgers soothed by Gould checks written on heavy paper and delivered by men who never stay for photographs. The same newspapers that once gossiped about whispered conflicts in Gilded Age drawing rooms now print columns of thanks, describing refinement, public spirit, a deep sense of moral duty. If you line up the dates, though, quietly, at a desk far from those marble lobbies, the timing draws a different silhouette. A major gift to a museum coincides almost exactly with the transfer of certain assets out of a New York bank to a European holding. A hospital wing is announced the same season. An internal memo recommends final disposition of the jewel. A university library is endowed in the year a key broker's name is removed from copies of a contract. On paper, none of these events touch. In the rhythm of the Gould accounts, they move together like shadow in hand. Every time the dark legacy tightens behind the scenes, the light outside grows brighter, carefully staged for the public gaze. In the photographs taken at these ceremonies, the family has learned its new pose. No extravagant diamonds, no glittering tiaras, just simple brooches, pearls, dark coats. A patriarch stands at a podium in a new hospital lobby, one gloved hand resting on a stack of speeches he won't fully read. The other hand, bare, ring catching the light, gestures modestly toward a plaque covered in a velvet cloth. Around him, doctors and trustees lean forward with practiced admiration. Somewhere in the back row, a reporter scratches notes, underlining phrases like atonement, obligation, giving back. The air hums with applause when the cloth is pulled away, revealing words carved in stone, in grateful recognition of the Gould family's commitment to the common good. No one mentions that, in a safe deposit box across town, a velvet case has just been checked in under a number instead of a name. This is philanthropy as smoke, not light. In the logic of the era, it makes perfect sense. When a story becomes too dangerous to confront directly, when hidden heirs might still be out there, when forbidden rooms have not been fully forgotten, when silent witnesses could be coaxed into speech, one answer is to drown the risk under monuments. A new museum gallery, with its tall ceilings and polished floors, invites the public to look up at frescoes instead of down at ledgers. A university scholarship awarded in perpetuity casts the donors as partners in knowledge, not owners of erased records. The more the Gould name appears carved into stone outside, the less anyone is encouraged to ask about what was carved out of their history inside. In board minutes from institutions that accepted these gifts, you can see how smoothly the narrative settled in. Trustees speak of the family as stabilizing forces in uncertain times, as benefactors whose generosity helps counteract the harsher reputations of our Gilded Age. One director notes, with a touch of relief, that such benefactions make it harder for the more strident critics to paint all magnates with the same brush. No one around the table asks whether the funds being dedicated to art and medicine might be linked, however indirectly, to a jewel once tied to foreign scandals and domestic silences. The money has been laundered not through banks, but through gratitude. Back at Gould Manor, the philanthropic tide leaves its own small traces. Invitations to charity receptions replace some of the more ostentatious dinners. Servants carry circulars announcing lectures and concerts in aid of worthy causes, instead of elaborate menus for 12-course feasts. In the library, an embossed volume appears on a lower shelf, a commemorative book published by a museum, listing major donors. Beside the family name is an engraving of the new wing, a facade of stone and glass. No hint of jewels anywhere near it. Yet if you flip to the back and check the date, you'll find it sits neatly against one of those shipping manifests that whispers of personal effects, leaving the city for a private vault. The house seems to exhale outward, sending its burden into marble exteriors and echoed halls. For the public, this becomes the final story. A dynasty that learned restraint, embraced responsibility, turned from raw accumulation to refined benefaction. For us, sitting with the papers that were never meant to be compared, the effect is more unsettling. It shows how thoroughly Golden Age secrets can be masked not only by destroyed files and altered wills, but by very real good deeds. A hospital built with money whose origin no one is allowed to trace still heals bodies. A library endowed by a family with a dark legacy still shelters readers under its dome. The question that lingers in these corridors is not whether the philanthropy did good, but what price was paid, and by whom, before the first stone was laid. And sometimes in the middle of that polished narrative, something refuses to stay blurred. In the archives of one of those proud institutions, a researcher pulls out an early draft of a donor plaque design, drawn in pencil on translucent tracing paper. The layout is familiar. Dedication text at the top, the Gould name centered below in elegant letters. But there is a third line sketched in, smaller, curved along the bottom edge, containing words that never made it onto the wall. The graphite is faint, almost timid, yet still legible. In memory of lives entwined with fortunes we will never fully record. Someone at some point pressed an eraser hard across that line until the paper thinned and the phrase vanished from the final bronze. On the finished plaque, now hanging in a bright lobby where visitors barely pause, there is no sign it was ever there at all, unless you stand very close, catch the light at an angle, and notice the shallow, wavering groove where that sentence once clung to the metal before being rubbed out into silence. By the time you step back from the Gould papers and let your eyes adjust, it's hard not to wonder if the jewel was ever really unique, or if it was just the sharpest example of a pattern repeating itself up and down the Gilded Age. Cross-referencing other archives, in other cities, you start to see faintly familiar silhouettes appear. In a steel magnate saw, correspondence, there's mention of a troublesome continental stone acquired during a tour of Europe, praised for its brilliance and whispered about for the lawsuits trailing behind it. In the papers of a Chicago grain dynasty, a private appraisal describes a diamond associated with unfortunate events abroad, now in need of recontextualization. Different families, different fortunes, but the outline feels eerily similar. A jewel with a troubled European history crossing the Atlantic on a first-class ticket, welcomed as a trophy, then slowly discovered to be more leverage than ornament. At first, the stories unfold like variations on a theme. There is the acquisition phase, all excitement and social ambition. A banker's wife returns from Paris with a necklace rumored to have belonged to a minor noble house ruined in a scandal no one lays out in print. A railroad heir commissions a tiara from a New York jeweler, insisting that a particular stone, recently arrived from an old estate in Vienna, be set at its center, despite the jeweler's quiet suggestion that other gems would match more harmoniously. For a season or two, these pieces glitter in ballrooms and studio portraits. Society columns describe them in breathless detail, down to the way gaslight scatters across the facets. The jewels do what they were supposed to do: dazzle, signify, declare that the new American money has tapped directly into old European veins. Then comes the tension. In one set of letters, a B. Southern copper baron complains that his wife's favorite brooch has become a topic of unhelpful interest after a foreign visitor recognizes it and makes a remark at dinner that sends the room briefly quiet. In another archive, a senator's son writes home about a duel narrowly avoided after a remark about a diamond's bloody path lands wrong in a private club. In each case, the object stops being neutral decor and begins to carry a story more complicated than the families are comfortable owning. The tone of the letters shifts. Enthusiasm gives way to careful phrasing, to talk of complications, of unfortunate associations that might cloud the family's standing if the wrong connections were drawn. The jewels remain technically intact, but socially they start to fracture. After that, tragedy is seldom far away. One mansion's records include a coroner's report about a fall on a marble staircase during a reception where a necklace of extraordinary size is mentioned in a servant's testimony, then never again. A crime blotter in another city notes a shooting outside a private club, the participants described as gentlemen known to frequent the highest circles, with rumors tying the argument to a lady's ornament of some notoriety. The official accounts always soften the edges: illness, missteps, misunderstandings. But if you place the clippings side by side with private diaries and legal notes, a darker picture forms. These are not random misfortunes. They are pressure points where luxury objects used to bind, to threaten, to settle debts no one wants written down, finally drag their hidden histories into the open, if only for a moment. And then, as at Gould Manor, the removal begins. Shipping manifests record small insured parcels, leaving not just New York, but Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, Baltimore. Personal effects, family property, items of no declared commercial value, sent to private vaults or out-of-the-way banks. Internal inventories in Manor. Those institutions show brief, cryptic entries: unnumbered item, client stone, high value, special holding per instructions, followed by later revisions where even those phrases are pared down or struck through. In household records, cabinets once labeled for private jewels become linen storage or book cupboards. On architectural plans of several mansions, niches and safes vanish between one renovation and the next, replaced by unremarkable paneling. Forbidden rooms are plastered over, not just in brick and wood, but in the way a family talks about itself. The next phase, too, rhymes across cities. In the wake of accidents, duels, financial collapses that never quite make full sense on the page, philanthropy swells. A railroad heiress funds an entire wing of a museum dedicated to classical sculpture. The same year, a diamond linked to a European estate disappears from her insurance schedule. A shipping magnate finances a hospital for sailors shortly after a quiet settlement in a foreign court where a jewel is mentioned in closed session transcripts no one was supposed to save. A Southern dynasty endows scholarships for promising youth of modest means, while quietly negotiating the transfer of sensitive assets into trusts that will never bear the family name. Each time the pattern holds: acquisition, brief display, tension, tragedy, silent removal, then a flurry of public virtue. In the language of the era, this is called respectability. In the margins, in those places where archivists scribble their own private reactions, another word appears more often: smoke. Golden Age secrets weren't simply buried in basements and burned in fireplaces. They were diluted in concert halls, libraries, and marble staircases dedicated to the betterment of mankind. Hidden heirs were overshadowed by portraits of scholarship recipients. Silent witnesses were outlived by eulogies praising donors for their selfless concern for the public good. Erased records were replaced by donor plaques and bronze busts. It didn't erase guilt. Nothing can fully do that. But it did shift the light so that for most people, The dark legacy existed only as an old rumor, if at all. The deeper you read, the less the Gould jewel looks like an isolated curiosity, and the more it resembles a case study in how risk was managed when fortunes were young and reputations still malleable. Luxury objects weren't just decorations. They were tools, collateral without paper trails, bargaining chips that could be slipped into a pocket and withdrawn from a negotiation, proof of secrets no attorney wanted to write down. A stone with the right history could bind a rival, threaten a partner, secure the silence of someone who knew too much. And when that history edged too close to daylight, the response was almost always the same: distance, obfuscation, removal, followed by an outpouring of carefully staged benevolence. The jewels moved into shadows. The names moved on to pediments. The risk, on the surface, seemed to evaporate, but the paper doesn't forget as easily as people do. In a regional archive far from any Gilded Avenue, a box labeled simply Estate Miscellany contains a cluster of documents from a lesser-known industrial family whose story almost exactly mirrors the Goulds. There is a receipt for a diamond purchased in Europe under a false name. There is a photograph of a hostess wearing a necklace with a central stone that looks, even through faded emulsion, like it was never meant to be ordinary. There is a coroner's note about a fall at home, an insurance adjustment downgrading certain items, and minutes from a board meeting congratulating the family on a large donation to a local college. On top of the stack lies a single sheet torn from a larger letter, bearing only one surviving sentence. We must ensure that no traceable line remains between the object and any tragedy with which it has been associated. Whoever tore the rest away misjudged how much of the pattern would still show. So when we talk about the Gould jewel now, in the cool distance of the present, we're not just dissecting one family's misfortune. We're peering into a mirror that reflects a whole way of thinking about power in the Gilded Age. The object at the center could be a diamond, a painting, a letter, a contract. What matters is how it's used and how violently it's erased when it stops cooperating. These are the artifacts that sit between the official histories, the polished narratives of railroads, philanthropy, moral progress, and the muffled stories of those who lived in their shadow. The servants reassigned without explanation, the partners bought out in cash and silence, the hidden heirs whose names never made it into printed family trees. The jewel at Gould Manor is just one point in a constellation of similar lights, each bright for a moment, each folded back into the dark when its story threatened to outgrow the frame. And if you want a single image to hold on to, one that ties all these threads together, you could do worse than to walk into a museum gallery on a quiet afternoon, the kind of room lined with glass cases and polite labels. Somewhere along the wall, behind a pane that reflects more of your face than the object inside, stands a diamond mounted in an unremarkable setting. Its card, printed in reassuring type, reads, "Origin, unknown, donated by an anonymous benefactor. Representative example of late 19th century taste." That's the official version, tidy and self-contained. But tucked behind the white card, visible only if the light hits at an odd angle, there is another slip of paper, older, browner, its edge just peeking out. On it, in a hand that never expected an audience, 3 words remain where someone tried too late to scratch them away. A family name, a country, and a year that does not match the story on the wall, lingering like a quiet contradiction waiting patiently to be read. The strange thing is how ordinary the beginning looks. No dramatic discovery in a sealed trunk. No key hidden behind a portrait. The modern reconstruction of the jewel's trail starts instead with paperwork being moved to make room for newer paperwork. A bank merging with another institution sends its old ledgers and safe deposit registers to a city archive for historical research. An insurance company, eager for good publicity, donates its 19th century appraisal books to a university. A defunct Manhattan law firm's files, rescued from a storage facility about to be cleared, arrive at a historical society in collapsing cardboard boxes. None of these transfers mention the Goulds, or a diamond, or Golden Age secrets. They're just records, heavy and dull, the kind that usually put readers to sleep. In one reading room, though, a researcher sits long enough for patterns to sharpen. It starts with a line in an insurance volume. European diamond of unusual size, client account. Cross-reference to private ledger, valuation not for public schedule. The carat estimate is scribbled in the margin, then half erased, as if someone thought better of leaving it that precise. Months later, in a different building altogether, another volume yields a similar phrase. Stone of exceptional size, provenance not fully documented, with a carat estimate that seems eerily close. The dates overlap with known Gould events. A major loan renegotiation here, a heavily publicized philanthropic gift there. The names on the client lines are veiled, holding companies, numbered trusts. But the handwriting is the same careful script used by clerks who once balanced columns for the railroad aristocracy. Curiosity becomes a quiet chase. The researcher begins to move between institutions, carrying notes instead of keys, treating archivists as guides to a hidden city of shelves. In the bank records, safe deposit entries mention special item, high value, no descriptive detail, connected to an account known, from published histories, to belong to a Gould-controlled entity. In the law firm's files, a draft opinion discusses reputational exposure arising from certain European acquisitions in language that dovetails perfectly with those appraisal phrases. In the insurance books, a later adjustment silently downgrades one exceptional item into miscellaneous stones, dated just after the reception where a guest collapsed on the Gould staircase. None of these documents say, "This is the jewel." They don't need to. The overlaps in numbers, dates, and careful omissions begin to hum together. The work, at this point, is less about finding a single smoking gun and more about learning to read hesitation. A ledger line where the ink grows suddenly darker halfway through a word. A page where the spacing between entries widens, as if the clerk paused with the pen hovering while someone dictated what could and could not be written. Duplicate inventories that match. Exactly, down to the spelling of minor items, except for one missing line in the later copy. In the law firm boxes, there are memoranda where one phrase, the object in question, appears so often it starts to feel like a character, moving silently from paragraph to paragraph. In the margins, different hands have left their own nervous fossils. Question marks later smudged, exclamation points half rubbed away, initials scratched out so hard the paper puckers. To make sense of it, the researcher has to think the way the Gilded Age thought about itself. How did families like the Goulds manage encumbrances they couldn't acknowledge in public? Which habits of encumbrance and encroachment are visible in the archives? The use of holding companies to hide ownership, of trusted law firms to centralize delicate knowledge, of newspapers to redirect attention with stories of philanthropy and moral responsibility. The logic of inheritance and succession leaves fingerprints too. Wills from the period show how specific assets could be entailed, how personal effects served as a catch-all category for anything no one wanted itemized. When one will names the large European diamond acquired in the 1870s, and a later version reduces everything to articles of adornment, the gap between them becomes as important as the words on the page. The trail reappears not because anyone confessed, but because the concealment itself was elaborate enough to leave a pattern. Silent witnesses may have been dismissed, forbidden rooms may have been plastered over, but the bureaucracy of control, insurance renewals, loan negotiations, estate planning, generated more paper than even a determined family could fully destroy. An erased record still reveals an outline. A burned letter still leaves a gap in a numbered sequence. A crossing out, done in haste, sometimes spares the first or last letter of a word. When you gather enough of these small betrayals together and lay them across a table, the architecture of concealment stands up in 3 dimensions. You can't always see the jewel itself, but you can map the space it occupied in the system that tried to bury it. And all the while, the official story remains smooth. Public histories of the Goulds talk about railroads and mansions, about philanthropy, about the evolution from raw accumulation to polished responsibility. Museum plaques thank anonymous benefactors for donations of jewelry whose labels read, "Origin Unknown." University. Archives proudly list endowments dating from the same years the jewel was shuttled between vaults. None of them mention foreign lawsuits, or late-night memoranda stamped confidential, or the memo that recommended physical removal of an item whose continued presence in domestic or corporate spheres is inadvisable. Those details exist only in the interstices, where archives from different worlds accidentally touch. So the reconstruction of the jewel's path becomes, almost inevitably, an act of reading the dark spaces as carefully as the printed lines. The researcher learns to pay attention to what's been folded, what's missing, what's been photocopied twice, for no stated reason. In one folder, an estate inventory appears in duplicate. In the second copy, a single line, European diamond, atypical size, has been carefully scraped off with a blade, leaving a faint, lighter strip of paper and a ghost impression of the original letters. In another box, architectural plans of Gould Manor are stored with a later set of renovation drawings. Overlay them, and the vanished niche where a locked case once stood reappears in the misalignment of walls. The jewel's trail is not a straight line. It's a palimpsest, a layered text in which every act of hiding writes a new sentence over the old. And maybe that's why this story, like so many on this channel, feels less like a neat revelation and more like something being whispered too late. By the time the pieces click together, by the time someone finally lines up the carat estimates, the carefully vague appraisals, the cross-referenced client codes, the timing of philanthropic surges with asset relocations, everyone who signed those letters is gone. The silent witnesses have no more to lose. The hidden heirs never got their day in court. The dark legacy has already been converted into marble facades and engraved names. What you're left holding is not a confession, but a map drawn out of gaps. In one folder, near the end of this archival trail, there's a sheet that seems almost blank at first glance. A carbon copy of a typed inventory, the ink so faint it barely registers. Only when the researcher tilts it under the lamp do a few words deepen into view. Most of the items are ordinary. One gold watch, assorted rings, miscellaneous documents. But halfway down, there is a line where the paper bears the scars of a battle between what was written and what was meant to survive. The description column is empty, scrubbed, clean. In the margin beside it, however, someone once wrote a single word in pencil, then tried to erase it in a hurry. The graphite never quite left. Lean close enough, and you can still make out the faint outline of the letters. A family name, unfinished, ending in a jagged stroke where the eraser came down hardest, like a hand slamming across a mouth just as it starts to speak. And so the trail of this Gilded Age jewel does not end in a vault or a ledger, but in the hush of reading rooms and corridors where the lights are dimmed one lamp at a time. The last document is slipped back into its folder, the brittle carbon copy lowered into a box that closes with a soft, decisive thud. Somewhere, in the distance of the archive, a door eases shut on its hinges, and the echo feels strangely familiar, like the sound of a cabinet in Gould Manor being locked for the last time. What survives of the stone now is not its brilliance, but the architecture built to hide it, altered inventories, careful omissions, a century of edits designed to ensure that no one outside those walls could ever quite prove what they already suspected. In that sense, the jewel is less an object and more a mirror held up to the era that created it. It shows how power in the Gilded Age depended not only on railroads and capital, but on deciding which tragedies would be allowed a place in the official record and which would be sealed behind forbidden rooms. It shows how hidden heirs could be written out, how silent witnesses could be moved off the payroll, how a dark legacy could be translated into marble wings and engraved plaques. And it reminds us that every erased record leaves a faint outline. Every crossed-out line is a hand, somewhere, hesitating just long enough for the truth to slip through the ink. If you wish to keep following those faint outlines, If you want to be here when the next sealed door finally opens, stay close to these halls. Leave your thoughts below. Every perspective helps. Illuminate what history tried to bury, and the conversation itself becomes another layer of testimony the archives never anticipated. If this story resonated with you, let us know. It tells the algorithm that these forgotten corridors are still worth exploring, that the dust on these files has not yet settled for good. And if you're willing to step deeper into the shadows, the next chamber awaits, with its own locked cabinets, its own portraits with eyes that do not quite meet the viewers, its own object quietly contradicting the version of events carved in stone outside. Some secrets survive only because those who feared them left no one to tell the truth. The rest survive in fragments like these: scratched out names, misplaced plans, a jewel too dangerous to display, and in the footsteps of those who are still willing to walk the length of these dim corridors, listening for the next door that was never meant to open.